The universe had rules. Every species that crawled out of the mud and reached for the stars learned this simple truth. Some rules were about physics. Some were about survival. But the most important rule, the one that every civilization followed without question, was this: when the pulse came, you went silent. You turned off your lights. You powered down your ships. You hid dot for 3 billion years. The Galactic Concord had obeyed this rule. They were an alliance of thousands of species, some so old that they had watched stars being born. They had built wonders that stretched across entire solar systems. They had conquered disease, extended life, and unlocked the secrets of faster-than-light travel. But when the pulse swept through the galaxy every 10,000 years, even the mightiest of them trembled and went dark, because something followed the pulse. Something terrible. They called them the Harvesters. Admiral Grace Sullivan had read every report, every ancient text, every terrified warning that the Concord had shared with humanity. The Harvesters were not a species in any normal sense. They were more like a force of nature, like a hurricane made of shadow and hunger. They came through rifts in space itself, drawn to noise and light and life. Any civilization that made itself known during the pulse was consumed. Not conquered, not enslaved, consumed, erased from existence as if they had never been. The last species to resist had been the Crethani, 700,000 years ago. They had been a proud warrior race with fleets that numbered in the millions. They had refused to hide. Their homeworld was now a dead rock, stripped of all life down to the bacteria in the soil. Grace stood on the bridge of the starship Endurance, watching Earth turn slowly below. She was 53 years old, with gray streaking her dark hair and lines around her eyes from too many years of hard decisions. She had commanded ships in 3 different conflicts, had lost friends and crew members, had seen the worst that the universe could offer. But nothing had prepared her for this. "Ma'am," said Lieutenant Danny Ortiz, his voice barely above a whisper, "the beacon just updated. The pulse will arrive in 72 hours. Grace nodded slowly. Around her, the bridge crew worked in tense silence. These were good people, brave people, but she could see the fear in their eyes. The same fear that had gripped every species in the galaxy for 3 billion years. "Show me the Concord fleet," she ordered. The main display shifted, showing a vast field of ships belonging to the Valorian Empire, humanity's closest ally in the Concord. There were thousands of vessels, each one representing centuries of advancement beyond anything humans had achieved. And one by one, their lights were going out. Engines powering down. Weapons going cold. Shields dropping. They were hiding. All of them. "The High Council has issued a final warning," Danny continued. He pulled up the message, his hands shaking slightly. "All member species must comply with silence protocols immediately. Any species that fails to comply will be considered hostile to the Concord and will receive no aid." "No aid," Grace repeated. "They're saying if we don't hide and we somehow survive, they'll still abandon us." "Yes, ma'am." Grace turned to look out the viewport at the stars. 40 years ago, humanity had made first contact with the Concord. They had been welcomed as new members of a galactic community, given access to technologies that advanced human civilization by centuries overnight. But they had also been given the rules, the warnings, the fear. She thought about her daughter, Amy, who was 12 years old and dreaming of becoming a starship captain someday. She thought about the 17 colony worlds that humanity had built, the 12 billion people who looked up at the sky and saw possibility instead of terror. She thought about everything that humans had survived to get here, the ice ages, the plagues, the wars, the asteroid that had nearly ended everything 65 million years ago. "Get me President Webb," she said. 5 minutes later, the president's face appeared on her private screen. Marcus Webb looked tired. He had been in emergency meetings for the past 3 days, ever since the first warning beacon arrived. "Grace," he said, "I assume you've seen the final warning." "I have, sir. The Concord is very clear. We hide or we die." Grace hesitated. She had served under 3 presidents, had always followed orders, had always done her duty. But something had been building inside her for weeks now, ever since the first reports came in. A feeling that she had been trying to ignore, trying to push down, trying to be rational about. "Sir," she said slowly, "have you noticed that no one has ever actually fought the Harvesters?" Webb frowned. The Crethni waited until the Harvesters arrived and then tried to defend themselves. But they didn't prepare. They didn't plan. They just stood their ground and died. Grace leaned forward. "In 3 billion years, thousands of species have hidden from the pulse. Dozens have been caught and destroyed. But no one has ever actually tried to fight back. No one has ever treated the Harvesters as an enemy that can be defeated. Because they can't be defeated. Grace, the Concord has been very clear about that. The Concord has been hiding for 3 billion years. They've never tried anything else. They've never even considered the possibility that there might be another way." Webb was silent for a long moment. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that humanity is very good at killing things that try to kill us. I'm suggesting that we've spent the last 40 years studying every piece of technology the Concord would give us. And we've been building things they don't know about. I'm suggesting that maybe, just maybe, we don't have to hide." "You're talking about fighting a force that has destroyed countless civilizations. I'm talking about not teaching our children that survival means living on their knees." Webb stared at her through the screen. She could see the weight of the decision pressing down on him, the impossible choice between certain danger and uncertain hope. "Dr. Blake's team," he said finally. "The weapons project." "Yes, sir. She told me it wasn't ready." "She told you it wasn't tested." "That's not the same thing." Another long silence. Then Webb took a deep breath. 72 hours, he said. "God help us all." He ended the call, and Grace turned back to face her crew. They were all watching her now, waiting, hoping. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice steady, "we have work to do." The galaxy went quiet. It happened slowly at first, then all at once, like a great wave of darkness rolling across the stars. The singing cities of the Meladin, famous across 1,000 worlds for their beautiful music, fell silent. The great shipyards of the Valorian Empire powered down, their massive construction arms going still. The trade routes that connected 10,000 civilizations emptied as ships found safe harbors and went dark on 100 billion worlds. Trillions of beings huddled in the darkness and waited for the pulse to pass. Dr. Nora Blake had not slept in 4 days. She stood in the main laboratory of the Geneva Research Station, surrounded by screens and equipment and the scattered remains of a dozen meals she had barely touched. Her team of 30 scientists worked around her in focused silence, each one aware that the fate of humanity might rest on what they accomplished in the next 3 days. "Run the simulation again," Nora ordered, a voice hoarse from exhaustion. Kevin Park, her assistant and closest friend, pulled up the data on the main display. He was young, barely 30, with the kind of brilliant mind that came along once in a generation. He had given up a comfortable position at MIT to join Nora's secret project 5 years ago. And he had never once complained about the long hours or the impossible deadlines. "The resonance frequency is still unstable," he said. "If we're off by even a fraction of a percent, then we'll destroy ourselves instead of them." "I know." Nora rubbed her eyes and stared at the numbers scrolling across the screen. "But we're out of time, Kevin. The pulse arrives in 68 hours. Either this works or nothing else matters. The project had started 20 years ago, in the early days of humanity's membership in the Concord. While other scientists have been dazzled by alien technology, eager to learn and copy and adapt, a small group had asked a different question. Why was the galaxy so afraid? They had gathered every scrap of information about the harvesters. They had studied the ruins of dead civilizations, analyzed the energy signatures left behind at massacre sites, built computer models of harvester behavior. And slowly, carefully, they had begun to understand. The harvesters were not invincible. They were not gods. They were creatures of a different dimension, drawn into normal space by the energy of the pulse. They hunted by detecting electromagnetic radiation, which was why silence was so effective at avoiding them. But they had weaknesses. Their dimensional rifts required enormous energy to maintain. Their ships, while incredibly powerful, were not designed for extended combat. They were predators, built to hunt prey that could not fight back. No one had ever given them prey that could. "I've got something," called out Maria Santos from her workstation. She was the team's expert on dimensional physics, a tiny woman with fierce eyes and a mind like a laser. "The containment field is stable. If we can generate enough power." "How much power?" Nora asked. "About 3 times what the entire planet currently produces." Kevin laughed bitterly. "Is that all?" "I didn't say it was easy. I said it was possible." Nora walked over to Maria's station and studied the readings. For a long moment, she was silent. Then she picked up her communicator. "Admiral Sullivan," she said, "we need to talk." While Nora and her team worked, President Webb addressed the world. He stood in the United Nations Assembly Hall, facing cameras that would broadcast his words to every human settlement in the galaxy. He had written and rewritten his speech a dozen times, but in the end, he had thrown away the prepared remarks and spoken from his heart. "The Galactic Concord has given us an ultimatum," he said. "Hide or die. These are the only options they believe exist. For 3 billion years, they have hidden from the pulse, and they expect us to do the same." He paused, looking directly into the camera. "I will not lie to you. The danger is real. The harvesters have destroyed civilizations far older and more powerful than ours. If we resist and fail, humanity will be erased from the universe. Our children, our history, our dreams, all of it will be gone as if we never existed." In homes across Earth and on colony worlds light years away, billions of people watched in silence. "But I believe in humanity," Webb continued. "I believe in our courage, our creativity, our stubborn refusal to accept defeat. We are a species that has looked extinction in the face again and again, and we are still here. We survived ice ages with nothing but fire and fur. We survived plagues that killed half our population. We survived world wars and nuclear standoffs and our own worst impulses." His voice grew stronger. "The Concord thinks we are children. They think we are too young, too foolish, too weak to understand the rules of the universe. But they have forgotten something important. Children grow up. And sometimes the young see possibilities that the old have stopped believing in." He took a breath. "In 3 days, the pulse will arrive. The Concord will hide. The galaxy will go silent. But Earth will not. We will light our cities. We will power our ships. We will broadcast our presence to the stars. And when the harvesters come for us, we will be waiting." The assembly hall was utterly still. "I am not asking you to die for humanity. I am asking you to fight for it. I am asking you to believe that we are more than prey, more than victims, more than a species that cowers in the darkness waiting for monsters to pass us by." Webb straightened his shoulders. "To our friends in the Concord, I say this. Watch us. Watch what humanity can do when we refuse to be afraid. And when it's over, When the harvesters are gone and the pulse has passed, remember this moment. Remember that you had a choice, and you chose to hide. We chose to fight. He looked into the camera one final time. To my fellow humans, I say, prepare yourselves. The next 3 days will determine the future of our species. Make them count. The broadcast ended. Across the galaxy, in hidden bunkers and darkened ships, the elder species watched the recording in stunned disbelief. "They're insane," whispered High Counselor Veth of the Valorian Empire. But deep in his ancient heart, something he had not felt in centuries began to stir. It was hope. The pulse swept through the galaxy like a wave of golden fire. It was beautiful in a terrible way, a ripple of energy that made stars flicker and planets tremble. Ancient species had tried to explain it in religious terms, calling it the breath of the universe or the heartbeat of creation. Scientists had studied it for eons without fully understanding its origins. But everyone knew what it meant. The harvesters were coming. Admiral Grace Sullivan stood on the bridge of the Endurance, watching the pulse wash over Earth's solar system. Around her, 1,000 human warships held position in perfect formation. They had been built in secret over the past 4 decades, hidden in asteroid bases and orbital stations that the Concorde knew nothing about. They were not elegant ships. They were brutal things, covered in weapons and armor, designed for one purpose only: to kill. "All stations report ready," said Commander Lucas Grant from his position at the tactical console. He was a big man with steady hands and calm eyes, the kind of officer who never panicked no matter how bad things got. "Planetary shields are at full power. Ground batteries are charged and tracking. Dr. Blake?" Grace asked. Nora's voice came through the communicator, tight with tension. "The resonance bomb is in position. We'll only get one shot at this, Admiral. If we miss, we won't miss." Across the planet below, every city blazed with light. Every satellite broadcast its signal into the void. Every ship ran its engines at full power, pouring electromagnetic radiation into space like a beacon in the darkness. Humanity was screaming its presence to the universe, daring the harvesters to come and try to silence them. They did not have to wait long. The first rift opened, 2 million kilometers from Earth. A tear in the fabric of reality that bled darkness into normal space. Then another. Then 100. Then 1,000. They spread across the solar system like cracks in ice, and from each one came the harvesters. Grace had seen images of them in the ancient records, but nothing had prepared her for the reality. The harvester ships were vast, angular things that seemed to swallow light itself. They moved without visible engines, gliding through space like predators stalking prey. Their hulls were covered in patterns that hurt the eyes, geometries that did not belong in normal space. "Contact," Lucas said, his voice remarkably steady. 15,000 harvester vessels. No, 20,000. They're still coming through. "Good," Grace said. "Let them all come. We want them here." The harvesters had never faced organized resistance before. They had spent 3 billion years hunting species that ran and hid, that powered down their defenses and prayed for mercy. They had no experience with an enemy that stood its ground and waited for them with weapons charged and shields raised. They were about to learn. "All ships," Grace commanded. Fire. A wall of nuclear fire erupted from the human fleet. Thousands of missiles streaked toward the harvester formation, their warheads carrying enough explosive power to crack moons. At the same time, the planetary defense batteries opened up, pouring directed energy into space in streams of brilliant blue light. The first harvester ships died without even understanding what was happening. Their hulls, designed to withstand the vacuum of their home dimension, shattered under the assault of nuclear explosions. Their crews, if they had crews, had no time to react before their vessels were torn apart. but there were so many of them. The harvesters adapted quickly. They were ancient hunters, after all, and they had survived for eons by being clever and ruthless. Their formation spread out, making it harder to target them. They began returning fire, launching weapons that twisted space itself, that turned matter inside out, that burned through shields like paper. "We've lost the Defiance," Lucas reported. "The Courage is taking heavy damage. The Jakarta colony ship is gone." "Keep firing," Grace ordered. "Don't give them time to think." The battle raged across the solar system. Human ships died by the dozens, then the hundreds. Cities burned as harvester weapons found gaps in the planetary shields. Millions of people died in the first hour, their lives snuffed out by an enemy that had been killing civilizations since before Earth's sun had formed. But humanity did not break. They did not run. They kept fighting with a fury that the harvesters had never encountered. "Admiral," Nora's voice came through, urgent. "We've identified their command ship. It's the one maintaining the dimensional rifts. If we can destroy it, where?" 200,000 kilometers, bearing 337. "It's heavily protected." Grace looked at the tactical display. The command ship was surrounded by 1,000 harvester vessels, a wall of darkness that would be suicide to attack directly. But she had not expected to survive this day. None of them had. They had simply decided that if humanity was going to die, they would die fighting. "All ships," she said. "Follow me." The Endurance surged forward, leading a wedge of human warships directly into the heart of the harvester formation. It was a crazy move, the kind of desperate charge that military textbooks would call foolish. But sometimes foolish was the only option left. Ships exploded around her. The Endurance shook as enemy weapons tore through its shields. Grace felt blood running down her face from a cut on her forehead, but she did not wipe it away. She kept her eyes on the command ship, growing larger in the viewport. "Dr. Blake," she said. "Now, deep in the Geneva Research Station." Nora pressed the button. The resonance bomb was not a weapon in the traditional sense. It was more like a key, designed to open a door that should never be opened. It generated a frequency that matched the energy signature of the dimensional rifts, but inverted. Instead of holding the rifts stable, it tore them apart. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the universe screamed. Every rift in the solar system collapsed at once, their edges tearing through the harvester ships like invisible blades. The command ship, caught in the feedback loop of its own dimensional technology, simply ceased to exist. One moment it was there, dark and terrible and ancient. The next moment, there was only empty space. The surviving harvesters were trapped, cut off from their home dimension. Their ships began to malfunction, their weapons losing power, their engines sputtering and dying. "Finish them," Grace whispered. Dot and humanity did. In hidden bunkers across the galaxy, the elder species watched in silence. Their sensors, carefully shielded to avoid detection, picked up every moment of the battle around Earth. They saw the human fleet charge into impossible odds. They saw cities burn and ships explode. They saw millions die in the first hours of combat. And then they saw something that had not happened in 3 billion years. They saw the harvesters lose. High Counselor Veth of the Valorian Empire stood in his command center, surrounded by officers who had served him for centuries. They were warriors, proud and strong, heirs to a military tradition that stretched back millions of years. They had conquered 100 species and built an empire that spanned a quarter of the galaxy. And they had hidden from the pulse like frightened children. "This is impossible," whispered General Tharn, Veth's oldest advisor. "The humans are. They're winning." "How are they winning?" Veth did not answer immediately. He watched the data streaming across his screens, the casualty reports and energy readings and tactical analyses. He watched as the dimensional rifts collapsed, as the Harvester command ship vanished, as the surviving enemy vessels were hunted down one by one. "They're not winning," he said finally. "They've won." The words hung in the air like a curse. For 3 billion years, the Concord had believed that victory against the Harvesters was impossible. They had built their entire civilization around that belief, had structured their laws and their culture and their very identity around the certainty that survival meant silence. And now, in the span of a few hours, a species that had only discovered fire a few 100,000 years ago had proven them wrong. "We should help them," said a young officer from the back of the room. Her name was Lyra, and she was barely 1,000 years old, still practically an infant by Valorian standards. "The battle isn't over. They're still fighting. We could what?" Tharn snapped. "Break the silence? Draw the Harvesters to our worlds as well? The rifts are closed. There are no more Harvesters coming. The humans have seen to that." Lyra stepped forward, her eyes bright with something that Veth had not seen in a Valorian face for a very long time. They stood alone against an enemy that has terrified us for eons, and they're winning. And we're just going to sit here and watch? She's right. Everyone turned to look at Veth. The High Counselor was standing very still, his ancient face unreadable. "Power up our ships," he ordered. "All of them. We're going to Earth, but the protocols," Tharn began. "The protocols were written by cowards." Veth's voice was sharp enough to cut steel. "We told ourselves that hiding was wisdom, that silence was survival. We made excuses and called them philosophy. And all the while, we were simply afraid." He walked to the main viewport and looked out at the stars. "I have lived for 6,000 years," he said quietly. "I have seen empires rise and fall. I have watched species evolve and go extinct. I thought I had seen everything the universe could offer, but I have never seen anything like what the humans did today." He turned back to his officers. They knew they might die. They knew the odds were against them. And they fought anyway, not because they were certain of victory, but because they believed that some things are worth dying for. That courage matters. That hope matters. His voice rose. "When was the last time any of us believed that?" The command center was silent. "Signal the fleet," Veth ordered. "Tell them we're breaking the silence. Tell them the age of hiding is over." Across the galaxy, other species reached the same conclusion. The Melading, whose song ships had been silent for weeks, powered up their engines and began broadcasting hymns of war and hope. The Architects, ancient beyond measure, emerged from their shielded tombs and added their voices to the growing chorus. One by one, lights began to appear across the darkness of space. The silence was breaking. On Earth, Admiral Grace Sullivan stood on the battered bridge of the Endurance and watched the sensor readings with disbelief. Ships were appearing at the edge of the solar system. Hundreds of them. Thousands. "Ma'am," said Lucas Grant, his voice shaking with exhaustion and something else. "We're receiving transmissions from the Valorian fleet. They're asking permission to enter the system. They want to help." Grace felt tears streaming down her face, but she did not try to stop them. "Tell them they're welcome," she said. The Allied fleet arrived just as the last Harvester ships were being destroyed. They found human vessels limping through debris fields, their hulls scarred by enemy fire, their crews exhausted beyond measure. They found a planet with burning cities and grieving families. They found a species that had paid a terrible price for their defiance, and they found something else. They found hope. "Admiral Sullivan," said High Counselor Veth over the communication channel, "on behalf of the Galactic Concord, I offer our assistance in rescue and recovery operations." Grace looked at the alien leader's face on her screen. 6,000 years old, she thought. He had been old when humanity was still figuring out how to farm. "Thank you, High Counselor," she said. "We accept. There will be a formal meeting of the Concord soon. Questions will be asked. Explanations will be demanded." Veth paused. "But I want you to know something first, Admiral. Something that I have not said to any species in all my years." "What's that?" "I am proud of you. All of you. You reminded us what it means to be alive." Grace smiled, even though it hurt. "We're just getting started," she said, and across the galaxy, in every hidden place where frightened species had waited for the pulse to pass, beings looked up at the sky and wondered if maybe, just maybe, they had been doing it wrong all along. The memorial stood in the heart of Geneva, where the research station had once been. It was a simple structure, a wall of black stone inscribed with the names of everyone who had died in the battle against the harvesters. There were thousands of names. Millions, if you counted the civilians who had been lost when cities burned. Dr. Nora Blake came here every morning at dawn. She would stand before the wall, reading the names she knew best, the colleagues and friends who had given their lives to build the weapon that had saved humanity. Then she would go back to work, because there was always more work to be done. Today, she was not alone. "Dr. Blake?" Nora turned to find a young woman standing behind her. She recognized the face immediately, had seen it on news broadcasts and official announcements for weeks now. "Ambassador Sullivan," she said. "I didn't expect to see you here." Grace Sullivan, newly appointed ambassador to the Galactic Concord, walked up to stand beside Nora at the memorial wall. She was dressed in formal diplomatic clothes rather than her military uniform, but she still carried herself like a soldier. "The Concord meeting is in 3 hours," Grace said. "I wanted to come here first, to remember." They stood in silence for a while, watching the sun rise over the city. Geneva was being rebuilt, as were a dozen other cities across Earth. The work would take years, maybe decades, but it was happening. "I heard they're calling it the liberation," Nora said finally. "The end of 3 billion years of fear. That's what the alien news networks are saying, anyway. The Meladin have composed a symphony about it. It's 8 hours long." Grace smiled slightly. "They invited me to the premiere. I had to decline politely. Too long? I fell asleep during the preview recording." Nora laughed, surprising herself. It was the first time she had laughed in weeks. "Kevin Park is doing well," she said. "The doctors say he'll make a full recovery. He's already talking about getting back to work. Good. We'll need brilliant minds like his for what comes next." "What has come next?" Grace was quiet for a moment, looking at the names on the wall. "The Concord wants to rebuild. They want to create a new alliance, one that isn't based on fear and hiding. They're looking to humanity for leadership." She shook her head slowly. "They think we're brave. They think we're special. Aren't we? We're stubborn. We're reckless. We're too young to know when something is supposed to be impossible." Grace touched one of the names on the wall, tracing the letters with her fingertip. "But maybe that's what they need. Someone too foolish to give up." The Concord meeting that afternoon was the largest gathering of species in galactic history. Representatives from 10,000 civilizations crowded into the ancient station at the galaxy's core, a structure so old that no one remembered who had built it. They had come to discuss the future, to plan for a universe without the harvesters, to figure out what came next. Grace stood at the central podium, looking out at a sea of alien faces. Some were humanoid, others were so strange that she could barely comprehend their shapes. But they were all watching her, waiting for her to speak. 3 billion years ago, she began, your ancestors faced a choice. They could fight the harvesters, or they could hide. They chose to hide, and for 100,000 generations, you have lived in fear. You have built your civilizations around that fear. You have taught your children that survival means silence, that courage means nothing, that hope is a weakness. The chamber was utterly still. Humanity is young. We have only been part of the Concord for 40 years. We have not seen the things you have seen or learned the lessons you have learned. Maybe that makes us foolish. Maybe that makes us dangerous. Grace straightened her shoulders. But maybe, just maybe, it makes us exactly what this galaxy needs. She thought about her daughter Amy, who was watching this broadcast back on Earth. She thought about all the children who would grow up in a galaxy without the pulse, without the fear, without the certainty that darkness was always waiting. The harvesters are gone, she continued. Not because we were stronger than them or smarter than them, but because we refused to accept that they could not be beaten. We refused to believe that hiding was the only answer. We refused to teach our children that the universe is something to be afraid of. She looked around the chamber. I know you are grateful. I know you are grateful. I know you see humanity as saviors, as heroes. But that is not why I am here. I am here to tell you that you could have done what we did at any point in the last 3 billion years. You had the technology. You had the numbers. You had everything you needed except one thing. What was that? Someone called out. The willingness to try. Grace let those words hang in the air. The galaxy is free now. For the first time since before most of your species existed, you can look up at the stars without fear. You can build ships that fly with their lights on. You can sing your songs and broadcast your signals and live your lives without wondering if the next pulse will be your last. She smiled. But freedom is not a gift. It is a responsibility. You must choose what to do with it. You must decide what kind of galaxy you want to build, now that you are no longer prisoners of your own fear. She stepped back from the podium. Humanity will be here to help. Not because we are special, but because that is who we are. We do not leave our friends alone in the darkness. We do not abandon those who need us. And we do not ever give up. The chamber erupted in sound. It was not applause, exactly, because many of the species present did not have hands to clap. But it was something similar, a wave of emotion and gratitude and hope that washed over Grace like warm water. Somewhere in the crowd, High Counselor Veth of the Valorian Empire was smiling for the first time in centuries, on Earth. In a hospital room in the rebuilt city of Geneva, Kevin Park watched the broadcast on a small screen by his bed. His body was still healing, would be healing for months yet. But his mind was already racing ahead, thinking about all the things that were now possible. Nora Blake sat beside him, her eyes red from crying but her face peaceful. We did it, Kevin said quietly. We actually did it. No, Nora corrected him gently. We started it. There's a lot more to do. Outside the window, the sun was setting over a city that was being rebuilt on a planet that had refused to die. In a galaxy that was finally free. And somewhere among the stars, humanity stirred. They would never stop.